What was my most vivid, what was I thinking?
Did you ever question your choice?
Well, I think a lot of the what was I thinking or what am I thinking came up before I went.
Okay.
Right? Because when I announced to people, when I told my family, when I told my friends, okay, so I'm leaving this life, I got the why. Why are you doing this? And it was murky to me at the time why. I couldn't even articulate it. And so the response would be like, well, are you sure you want to do that then? Like, that sounds kind of crazy. And I had to work through that. What am I thinking? What am I thinking? Like, I had to work through those fears all the time. I think there was two things at that time that helped me. At that time, the trip for me was so much about succeeding and being seen in what I would describe as a very masculine ideal. And so the answer to the question why in my head was, well, because when I finish skiing 4 million feet, I'm going to be known as the person with the biggest cojones in the room, right? So that was kind of what I was telling myself, what my ego was like, this is why you're doing this, even though I probably wouldn't have articulated it that way at that time. And then I met somebody kind of randomly who I was sitting on a chairlift with him one day, and I thought maybe I'll tell him. The response so far from other people hasn't been great, but maybe I'll tell him that I'm thinking about doing this trip. And he just turned to me in this very matter-of-fact way and just said, well, of course that's what you're going to do. That makes the most sense. Let's celebrate. And that was all I needed. That one person who had an ounce of lunacy in them to kind of see a bit of common sense in what I was doing. Now, these days, when I get that response, you're crazy, I take it as a cue to move forward. Not in a rebellious way, not because I'm like, oh, I'll show you, but in a, like, right, there's something about this that I need to figure out. I'm not looking for the permission and the validation and the approval as much as I think I used to. Now, there were certainly other times on the trip, what were you thinking, or what are you thinking? And those varied. Depended on there were some situations that were quite dangerous, as I mentioned, the backcountry stuff. There was one situation in Japan where I thought, I gotta get out of here. Like, what am I thinking? This is not safe. I gotta get out of here. And probably sometimes there was times where people were involved. Like, what am I thinking? Hanging out with I don't know, that kind of thing. But once I was on the trip, the what are you thinking about the whole trip, that part didn't really exist. Once I had the permission from my friend, my crazy friend, then I was golden. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious what role you think winter, kind of like this, the snow and ice and cold, how that affected your experience, or why you were drawn to spending so much time in those conditions.
That's a great question. I've never been asked that. What did winter really have to do with this? Because you live in Edmonton and you're like, get out of winter. Like, why would this crazy woman want to spend 10 months in solid winter? This might sound like a kind of an ooey-wooey answer, but I was born in December, so I feel like I was born into winter. And I think I am comfortable in that, maybe I'll even say kind of murkiness or darkness or coldness. And I feel quite often more alive in cooler temperatures than I do in heat, which is strange because I live in San Diego now, which is like, I gotta get out of there. But that's, I've never thought about that. What did winter have to do with this? When I think about the trip itself, I'm not sure that it was winter, but certainly the mountains that played a huge role. Because really and we saw a little bit of this when I read the part in Chamonix, what they became were mirrors. And some of you might have a postcard that was snuck into the book that says, "With the mountains as mirrors." That was the alternate title for this book. Because, and some of them were snow-covered and some of them were not, but ultimately that was a huge place. They were like another person for me in the book, another character. Is what is it that they're reflecting back to me that I need to learn? Is it their permanence? Is it their ability to erode? Is it their steadfastness and immovability? Or is it the fact that they shift and change in quite dramatic ways? The kind of duality of that. and the idea that those two things could exist within a person at the same time. I mean, that was such a huge learning. So I love winter, but I think it was more the mountains that taught me than perhaps the season of winter, if that makes sense. Yeah, at the back, green shirt.
Yeah. Two questions. How did you fund your trip? And the second one is, now that you're back from your trip, has your life moved to being more conventional in the conventional sense, or you still sort of try and live in an unconventional type of way?
Right. So how did I fund the trip? Great question. And since the trip, has my life become more or less conventional? Yeah. So how did I fund the trip? Hallelujah, Royal Bank of Canada, right? So there's a couple of different things. First of all, I took on as many extra jobs as I could. I was catering at night and just saving as much as I could. Secondly, a little event called the 2010 Winter Olympic Games came to Vancouver, and I owned an apartment that was right on the edge of the Olympic Village that at the time my father said was like the worst investment I could have ever made. I just sold him the apartment like 2 days ago. It's like bad investment, eh, Pops? So I rented my apartment during the Olympics, which was great money. And then this was the kicker for most people, is I took a line of credit against my mortgage. And this was in 2009, 2010, so right after the economy tanked. And people were like, you're going to leave your job and take out more money on you? This was like, that's insane. And when I look back now, I've come to be a big believer in what I would call divine compensation. So when I added up well, not only the stuff with my dad, but when I added up what I was making career-wise for those years that I would have been traveling, what I spent on the trip in total, I came to a number that was like, well, that's lost earnings, say, or lost money in my bank account. Almost to the penny, that was the book advance, which was such a fascinating thing to me. So that was how I funded it. The second question was conventional or not conventional. I think from the outside, I think most people that have known me for a long time would still see a woman who is driven and achievement-oriented and going for it and the gusto and all that kind of stuff. Internally, that feels very different because of what I talked about, those forms of motivation, the fear-based motivation versus what I said before, the love-based or compassion-based. So it feels very different to me. I think from a conventional or unconventional standpoint, in a very tangible of this world way, probably unconventional. Like I don't go to an office every day. I travel, I work wherever I want. I balance the coaching business that I have with writing. That means I can spend a month in Tofino, with the Eagles if I want to, or I can do corporate work in, here or in Winnipeg and fly up and work with people. So it's, I have a lot of freedom and kind of creative control over that, but still very achievement oriented if the achievements fit and are in alignment with a call to adventure. Yeah. Very back, someone I saw. Yes.
Actually, I had a few questions earlier that you have already answered, so thank you for that. And I am curious, with your shift in perspective, with what you've been through and what you've been called to do. You mentioned earlier that you now have this sort of, you're driven to like a call to serve. And what does that look like for you going forward? So what is that sort of bigger picture passion or drive for you, after?
I feel like some of it relates, I've developed a whole other, well, let me rephrase the question. So this idea of being called to serve, like what does that really look like? And I think the question that I'm consistently asking is, and again, not in an egotistical way, but like, what is the best and highest use of me? And if that means you should go back, Steph, to corporate marketing and PR, then hallelujah. Hopefully I'll have the courage to say yes to go back to that. If that means, Steph, you should be like on the corner flipping burgers and just smiling like mad at everybody that goes by, then hopefully I'll have the courage to say yes to that. So it's very up in the air, depending on what I feel called to do. The things that are on the radar coming up would be to continue the work that I'm doing coaching-wise with people. I work with a lot of, some guys, but mostly women, 25 to 45, who are both in corporate settings and on their own as freelancers. And really going back to what I said before, like how do we release the expectations and limitations that you have in your life that are either set and ingrained by yourself or by others, and allow you to be free, whether that means you're going to start traveling the world or whether that means you're going to be the female Prime Minister of Canada. It's very different. So that's one of the tangible things, is the work that I do coaching-wise is a call. I have a second and third book in my noggin that I would really like to move forward with, feel very called to write those. And I think the overarching service goes back to that. How can I be of service in helping people to feel free in their lives? Whether that's, I want to feel free through motherhood, or I want to feel free through running a company, or I want to feel free through raising children, or what, all those different things.
Just wondering, you talk about success and achievement. What do you define as success? Is it freedom? Is it doing whatever you want? Is it?
What's my definition of success? My husband would say, are you on the balance beam? And what he means is, are you on purpose, on calling? And that is what I would define as success. The second part of the bucket list, am I listening to hear the call, is one thing. Am I courageously saying yes to that and taking action on it is a whole different thing. And in my mind, if I'm doing that, that's success.
So you left a big corporate job, or that sort of safe and more predictable life, and you took a big step and went with gusto. Sounds awesome, but scary. And were you lonely in that trip, or after, if you give it up? Because I think of how, even if you're not happy, some of the predictability of whatever you have is part of your comfort zone, and then you give it all up, and
what do you have?
Yeah.
Two things. The loneliness, for me, I've come to understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. So when I'm traveling on my own in the world, there's a sense of belonging and being at home within myself, which is solitude, which is different than loneliness, like, oh my God, I've got no one and nothing around me, which oftentimes has to do with the security that you've talked about, like the security and safety of stuff. And, how do I answer that? That how do I deal with not necessarily having the security and safety around me? I think, to be frank, that's where faith for me comes in. And not necessarily in a religious way, but am I going to place my faith in this feeling and this person in this situation, which could be corporate, which could be not, which, all these different things? Or am I going to place my faith in this feeling, in this situation, etc., which might be, quit it all and leave? And that has a lot to do with what I would now call my use of faith and intuition. And I would say that has become stronger and more secure, and there's a feeling of safety within that methodology. Does this feel intuitively like the right thing to do? Versus the feeling that I used to get of security, which was, that paycheck's coming in 2 weeks and I know it. Much different. So this isn't to suggest that they're polar opposites. You can hold both of those things. You can have a life that feels like intuitive and lit up and a calling at the same time as traditionally, safe and secure. Or they could be different. But for me, it fits much more in the how much faith do I have in my intuition? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah?